I'd like to start by asking, I think, Rob Collins from the Rivers Trust to give us a sense of the current state of the condition of our rivers in the UK, and if you can try and sort of separate the media concern from what's actually happening to our rivers, because there have been some improvements and then some deterioration. Could you try and paint the picture for it as of today?
Yes, so if we take English surface waters, we find that only around 16% are at good status. Not a single English river is at good chemical status. Seemingly the situation is better in Wales and Scotland, with sort of 44 and around 56% good status, respectively. But that isn't really telling the full picture, because neither country there has really undertaken a rigorous analysis of chemical status, really. It would appear that we somewhat flat-lined here, that the next major target is 2027 under the Water Framework Directive that we still loosely follow. And it would seem that the best we can do is sort of limp along to around 21% good overall status in England. So in terms of the Environment Agency undertake classification for around nearly 4,000 water bodies, I believe, or surface water bodies. The last round of classification, around 150 improved. So over that classification period and the previous one, just 150 improved, and there was actually something like slightly more that deteriorated, 153. So we really are flatlining. And the Water Framework Directive sets up very clearly we shouldn't have any water bodies deteriorating at all. In broad terms, agriculture contributes something like 62% to those failures, water industry something like 55%, road runoff 18, 20%. Those figures add up to more than 100% because, of course, any one water body can fail for more than one reason. The urban element, the urban runoff and urban pollution, is very likely an underestimate, I would suggest. So it feels like we're in a pretty dire situation, and it reflects years of investment. And the Environment Agency have this aspiration to reach around 77% good status by 2027, but that was dependent on around £50 billion being invested. And despite the fact the agency have shown that actually with that investment, the monetized benefits exceed those costs, we've seen just a fraction of that being invested over the last decade or two.
The last 5-year period pricing review that we're in at the moment, the water industry were setting out plans to invest 51 billion. That's the figure that you just mentioned. Is that where that comes from? Do you have a sense for how much of that has been invested thus far? I'm not sure if that's the right question for you or for anyone on the panel, but I should have asked the Water UK people before.
I get the sense that the 50 billion is actually not just water industry. It's tackling road runoff, agriculture as well. But I don't know about the water industry figure input to that. But I think it's predominantly formed the bulk of the investment thus far.
Right. Peter, could I ask you, in terms of a similar question, in terms of the work that you've been doing in monitoring not just the Windrush, where you focus most of your efforts, but a number of other river systems around the country. Are you seeing any signs of improvement since we last spoke, the last 2 or 3 years?
I would say no. In fact, since I last gave evidence, I've been giving advice to something like 30 or 40 campaign groups around the country, and they're all very concerned about their local rivers. And I've been helping them identify how to get data, how to analyse it, and then how to do something about it. So I would say no.
And the data that you're analysing is showing a deterioration, or is it somewhat stable as...
Well, I need to separate out the monitoring of the rivers from the monitoring of the sewage works, the pumping stations, in other words, the performance of the water companies and the regulators. So my focus is more on how stuff gets into the rivers, not actually what it does in the rivers. That tends to be the local campaigners and the citizen scientists and the like who do much of that work.
And Charles, what's the perception from you're looking at this from a national perspective, coordinating campaign groups around the country. what's your sense of the current state of our rivers?
I mean, the short answer is very bad. The long answer is that everywhere you look, and I think that the fact is we are learning more all the time, mainly because it is the citizen scientists who are mobilising around the country to actually provide the data. I mean, if we take like a critical area for, say, agricultural pollution in the southwest, the number of EA monitoring sites in their southwest region, which is Devon, Cornwall and Somerset, have been cut by a third over the last decade. So it's the people, the ordinary people who are getting in the rivers who are telling us what's going on. So if we look at a river like the Wye, the phosphate levels, as we speak today, are at an all-time high.
We're going to come on to the River Wye action plan, I think, during the course of this session, but maybe not with you. It's coming up shortly. So two of you mentioned citizen science. Do you see, how is the Environment Agency taking data that citizen scientists are coming up with, or indeed water companies for that matter? Is there a receptiveness to information being provided by people on the ground, and how is that then either changing behaviour or policy within the water company or the regulator?
I think in my experience, the Environment Agency don't want to take on board data from citizen scientists unless it's done in a very organised and more scientific fashion. For instance, like on the River Wharfe, where you've got a fellow of the Royal Society who's actually managing all the citizen scientists, making them do regular testing at the same places right throughout the year. If you're just doing sort of spot testing occasionally in your river, then the agency are obviously not going to take much notice of that.
We are moving, we're going to come on to some other questions about monitoring in a second. I don't want to steal other colleagues' thunder, but the announcement this week of additional bathing, first time, I think we've got 12 river systems being tested for bathing water status, and the government is going to be consulting on year-round testing rather than just during the so-called summer swimming season. Do you welcome that? Is that it's obviously a very modest start with 12. How do you think that could be a precursor to a much more
well, as you
system?
say, it's a very modest start. I think France has 575 bathing sites on rivers. What we know about most of those bathing sites is the water is in poor quality. But what we must remember is that there is no guidance being published by the Environment Agency regarding public safety in bathing other than those tiny single-digit number of bathing sites. We've just completed a big citizen science exercise, which, by the way, the Environment Agency were not remotely interested in, on the Thames in the run-up to the Oxford and Cambridge boat race, where we uncovered levels of E. coli that were off the Richter scale in terms of what is safe for the public. And as the sun, the temperatures are warming up, it's half-term in 3 weeks' time, tens of thousands of families are going to be in the rivers, on our beaches, going to lakes, none of which have bathing status protections. And I'm not exaggerating, somebody is going to die because of this pathogen levels we have in the rivers, and it's nobody seems to be interested in it. Nobody is giving any. The water companies won't give any public health guidance on it. The EA won't give any public health guidance on it if it's not a bathing site. So of course we welcome a few more bathing sites, but there's nothing like the national coverage to provide the safety net to protect the public from what is going into our rivers.